Imagine an automotive plant. The assembly line is humming, they're building thousands of cars a day, and suddenly the whole thing it grinds to a complete halt.
Oh, yeah. The absolute worst nightmare for a floor manager.
Literally a nightmare. Thousands of workers are just standing around, machines are silent, and the factory's bleeding, roughly $100,000 an hour. And why? Because the plant ran out of a specific 10-cent steel bolt used in the door hinge.
Right. And let me guess, the computer system said they had like 10,000 of those bolts in the warehouse.
Exactly. The computer says 10,000, but you walk over to the physical shelf and it's completely empty. So today we are doing a deep dive into the hidden, high-wire active inventory control.
It really is a fascinating topic.
It totally is, because it's this masterclass in how businesses actually manage to have the exact product you want exactly when you want it without going bankrupt from the cost of, just storing it all.
Yeah, it's an incredible balancing act. And I think it is crucial to stop looking at inventory as just static boxes sitting in a dusty room somewhere.
Right.
Because inventory is really a living, breathing system of data that has to be perfectly mapped onto physical space. It requires this rigorous, relentless control. Because as that automotive plant example shows, if you lose control of the physical items, you aren't just dealing with a messy warehouse. You are dealing with catastrophic operational failure.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to prevent that factory from shutting down, you first have to know exactly how a single item moves and where it lives from the second it arrives on a truck.
Exactly.
And the sheer number of transaction management points required to just keep a digital system aligned with physical reality is staggering. We're talking about recording the initial receipt at the dock, the put-away action, the transfer of finished goods, picking for an order.
Shipping out the door.
Yeah, shipping, and even processing customer returns.
Right. And identifying and managing every single one of those touch points is critical because those are your points of failure. Like, take something really complex like work in progress or WIP.
Let's define that for a second. WIP is sort of the awkward teenager phase of inventory, right?
I love that, yeah.
Like, it's not raw material anymore, but it's not a finished sellable product yet either.
Exactly. So say you are manufacturing bicycles, you have raw steel tubes over here, and you have finished bikes in boxes over there. Those are super easy to count.
Right.
But WIP is the partially welded frame sitting on the factory floor waiting for wheels. And tracking WIP physically and financially is a nightmare because its value and its physical nature are actively transforming.
So how do you even track it?
Well, you have to use really robust mechanisms. So barcode scanning at every workstation or RFID tags that automatically communicate with the company's enterprise resource planning software, which is essentially the digital brain of the company.
Right, because if a worker just grabs a raw gear cassette for, a rush assembly job,
And they forget to scan it out of raw materials and into WIP.
the entire system just goes blind.
Precisely. The computer thinks you have 50 gear cassettes ready for tomorrow's production run, but you actually have 49. And that one blind spot immediately infects your purchasing decisions, your sales promises, everything.
Wow.
This is why investing heavily in scanning technology at these specific transaction points and, delivering massive amounts of training on process design is the absolute bedrock of inventory control.
Right. It's about building a perfect digital twin of your physical space. But, okay, once an item is accurately scanned into the building, it actually has to physically go somewhere.
Yes, the physical reality.
Which brings us to the physical layout and location analysis of a warehouse, because there are all these principles for grouping items. You can group by function, by turnover rate, which just means how fast they sell, or common storage needs, or, separating working stock from reserve stock.
Right, there are a lot of strategies.
It actually reminds me a lot of organizing a home kitchen.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
How do you see the kitchen mapping onto a massive distribution center?
Well, think about organizing your pantry, specifically your spices. There are basically two ways to do it. You could use a fixed location system. That's where the cumin and the paprika are always in the exact same drawer, in the exact same slot, every single time.
Right. Very predictable.
Yeah, it makes them incredibly easy for your human brain to learn. Like, you can reach for the cumin with your eyes closed.
But there's a massive drawback to that fixed system when you scale it up to a warehouse. If you run out of cumin, what happens to that space in the drawer?
It just sits there, completely empty.
Exactly. In a warehouse, that results in a very high percentage of unused bin space. A worker knows the gear housings are always in aisle 4, bin 12. But if you run out of gear housings, that bin just sits there empty and wasted.
Right.
Because it's reserved for them.
And in logistics, Empty space is literally burned money.
Yes, exactly.
Which means the alternative is a random location system.
Yeah.
So in my kitchen analogy, that would mean taking a new jar of cumin and just shoving it wherever there happens to be an inch of free space in the pantry.
Wherever it fits.
Maybe today it's behind the cereal, tomorrow it's next to the baking soda. It's the most efficient use of physical space. But a human cook would just go insane trying to find anything.
And that is exactly where the technology takes over. A random location system represents the pinnacle of storage efficiency, but it is totally impossible for a human brain to memorize on a massive scale.
You need a map every time.
Exactly. It requires the digital brain, the warehouse management software, to remember that the cumin is behind the cereal. And practically, this is executed using automated storage and retrieval systems, or ASRS.
Oh, these are those incredible robotic systems you see in videos online, right?
Yeah, they are wild to watch.
Where these robotic cranes and shuttles just zip down 50-foot-tall aisles at like 40 miles an hour, grabbing specific bins and bringing them to a human packer.
Yes. The robot doesn't care if the gear housings are stored next to the steering wheels today and next to the brake pads tomorrow. It just follows the coordinates provided by the digital brain.
Though I assume you can't just randomly assign everything, right? There have to be rigid physical constraints.
Oh, absolutely.
For instance, first in, first out, or FIFO. Like if you are storing dairy or pharmaceuticals, you absolutely have to cycle out the oldest stock first to avoid spoilage.
Right. You can't just let milk sit in the back corner for a year.
And obviously you need special zoning for hazardous materials. You can't let the algorithm randomly shove highly flammable liquids wherever there's an open shelf right next to a bunch of cardboard boxes.
Yeah, that would be a disaster. So a modern layout is this incredibly complex dance dictated by a blend of algorithmic space efficiency and rigid, real-world physical constraints.
Okay, so we've established how to track and store items perfectly in a digital utopia. But reality is messy. What happens when the robotic crane goes to aisle 4, reaches into bin 12, and the box it's supposed to grab just isn't there?
Yes. The worst feeling.
The system swears you have 50 hydraulic door closers, but the physical reality is just a complete void. This brings us to the concept of shrinkage.
Shrinkage is a fantastic term. It represents the mysterious gap between what the computer says you have and what actually exists on the shelf. It's the phantom inventory.
And the causes of this inaccuracy are usually painfully mundane, right? It's not some grand heist like in the movies.
No, rarely. It's simple employee errors, poorly designed intake forms, a malfunctioning barcode scanner, or inadequate training on how to properly document pulling an item off a shelf, or, and this one is really fascinating, errors in the bill of material.
The bill of material, or boom, let me make sure I have this right. The bill of material is basically the exact digital recipe for a product.
Yes, exactly.
So if we are manufacturing a specific car door, the BOM tells the computer that making one door requires exactly one steel panel, one glass window, and 4 hinge bolts.
Correct. But what if the engineering team changed the physical design of the door on the assembly line, and now it actually requires 5 hinge bolts to assemble, but nobody updated the digital recipe in the computer?
Oh, wow. Then the system goes completely blind. Because every time the factory builds a door, the physical reality uses 5 bolts, but the computer only deducts 4 from the inventory.
Exactly.
So over a month of building thousands of doors, your inventory records become wildly inaccurate, entirely behind the scenes, until one day the shelf is empty and the assembly line just stops.
It's a silent killer of accuracy.
But let me push back on this for a second. Let's play devil's advocate here. We're talking about 10-cent bolts.
Right.
Obviously, a stopped assembly line is bad, but generally speaking, isn't it cheaper for a business to just accept a little bit of shrinkage, like a 2% error rate, rather than spending millions of dollars on robotic cranes, barcode infrastructure, and training just to track every single screw perfectly?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the costs of inaccuracy aggressively compound. It is never just about the lost 10 cents for a missing bolt. The cascade of costs is devastating.
How so?
First, you get lost sales and back orders because you promised a customer something you didn't actually have. Then you suffer from collapsing productivity because your highly paid workers are wandering the floor, spending hours hunting for parts that literally do not exist.
So your labor cost per unit skyrockets because people are searching instead of actually building.
Yes. And then comes excessive expediting. To save the multi-million-dollar customer relationship, You end up paying an absolute fortune in excess freight costs to ship a replacement part overnight across the country.
Oh, man.
You miss production schedules, deliveries are late, your brand reputation takes a massive hit.
So it's this operational snowball effect. A 10-cent error turns into thousands of dollars in overnight shipping and lost labor.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the behavioral psychology of the company changes, which is even worse for the bottom line.
What do you mean?
Well, to compensate for these constant, unpredictable shortages, floor managers panic. They start creating excess production just to have a buffer. They order double the raw materials just in case the system is wrong.
Which completely defeats the purpose of lean manufacturing.
Exactly. This ironically leads to heavily inflated inventory levels overall, which ties up crucial capital in physical boxes instead of investing it in growth.
Right.
And what happens when you hold too much excess inventory over a long period of time, it turns into inactive and eventually obsolete inventory. It literally becomes scrap metal that you have to pay a disposal company to haul away.
Wow.
So ignoring that missing screw doesn't save you money. It eventually leads to throwing away thousands of dollars of obsolete products.
Because inaccuracy is an absolute profit killer, which leads us to the big operational question. How do companies actually audit themselves? Like, how do they catch these ghosts in the system and fix the errors before the assembly line shuts down?
There are a couple of approaches.
Right, let's start with the old school brute force method, the periodic inventory.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The annual physical inventory count. The bane of every warehouse worker's existence.
It sounds incredibly stressful because to execute a periodic inventory, you literally have to shut down all operations.
Yep. Everything stops.
You bring in these massive teams of trained personnel to physically tag and count every single item in the facility at one time. You have to institute strict cutoff policies where absolutely no materials are allowed to move.
Yes. No receiving, no shipping. The business is completely frozen.
It's like a frantic spring cleaning where you tear apart your entire house for a weekend, completely paralyzing your actual life just to count your socks.
It is exactly like that. It's highly disruptive. It destroys your shipping metrics for that week. And frankly, it is deeply flawed.
Why flawed? Just human error.
Exactly. Because it involves exhausted people counting thousands of small items under immense time pressure, it is still highly subject to human error. You might freeze your business for 3 days only to introduce entirely new counting errors into the system.
That defeats the whole purpose.
Right. This is why modern operations have largely abandoned it and lean heavily towards cycle counting.
Cycle counting. Now, this is a much leaner, continuous approach, right? You aren't stopping the whole operation.
Right. Instead of shutting down once a year, items are counted on a predetermined schedule throughout the entire year. You use a much smaller, dedicated auditing team. Sometimes it's literally just integrated into the daily tasks of the pickers themselves.
Oh, that makes sense.
It is vastly less disruptive. And because it's a regular part of a normalized daily workflow, people aren't rushing, meaning it's far more accurate and supports continuous process improvement.
But how do they actually decide what to count and when? Because a 1 million square foot warehouse is massive. They aren't just picking aisles out of a hat.
No. It's driven by ABC classification logic. This is essentially applying Pareto's law, or the 80-20 rule, to your auditing process.
Okay.
You categorize your inventory into 3 buckets. A items are the critical few. Maybe they represent 70% of your inventory's total dollar value, but they only make up 20% of the actual physical items in the building.
Got it.
Because they are so incredibly valuable or critical to keeping the assembly line running, you might cycle count A items very frequently, say 12 times a year.
So every single month you are verifying those high-stakes items.
Exactly. Then your B items are average value and average volume. Maybe you count them 4 times a year. And your C items, the trivial many has, the cheap zip ties and basic packaging supplies, you might only count them once a year.
You prioritize your human auditing labor exactly where the financial risk is highest.
Precisely.
That makes total sense. You don't spend an hour counting zip ties when you could be verifying the stock of titanium components. There's also a great practical pro tip for cycle counting. You should count an item when its physical stock is at or near 0.
Yes, absolutely.
Which, logically, is brilliant. It is profoundly easier and faster to count 3 remaining boxes in a bin than to count 300. Or you trigger a cycle count at the exact moment a new shipment arrives to verify the new balance before it gets put away.
What you're describing is building accuracy into the natural rhythm of the warehouse. It integrates the audit into the life cycle of the product, rather than treating it as a separate, punitive, freezing event.
Okay, so we've detailed the massive, painstaking effort it takes to track, store, route, and physically count all this inventory. But here's where supply chain management takes a radical turn. What if a company decides they just don't want to deal with it anymore?
Right.
What if the labor and the tech are just too much and they want someone else to do it?
Now we are entering the realm of alternative replenishment approaches. This isn't just a different warehouse layout. It's a fundamental shift in how businesses interact with each other.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The evolution of these supplier relationships is fascinating. It starts with a concept called rapid replenishment.
Right.
This is where the customer shares their point of sale data. The literal cash register scans directly with the supplier. So the company making the product can see exactly what is selling in the retail store in real time, and they align their factory production schedule accordingly.
It changes everything.
Yeah, the buyer still has to formally place purchase orders, but the lead time shrinks dramatically because the supplier isn't guessing anymore.
It's the first step of breaking down the firewall between two separate companies.
Yeah.
The supplier isn't waiting for a delayed signal. They're looking over the customer's shoulder at the data.
Right. Then it evolves into the next phase. Continuous replenishment. Now, the supplier is using those shared data patterns to keep the customer's inventory at an agreed-upon level, and they do it without the buyer placing formal orders. The supplier's algorithms just know when to put boxes on a truck.
And that leads directly to the holy grail of outsourcing. VMI, or vendor-managed inventory.
Right, VMI.
In VMI, the vendor basically takes total strategic control of the buyer's shelf. Let's say you are a massive hardware store. Instead of your team trying to figure out how many power drills to order, you hand that entire aisle over to the drill manufacturer.
You just let them handle it.
Exactly. Through direct API data feeds, the manufacturer creates the inventory policy, tracks the stock, and replenishes it entirely on their own. The hardware store doesn't manage that inventory at all anymore. The vendor does it for them.
Which leads to the absolute extreme of this model, consignment. This is wild.
It really is.
In a consignment model, the vendor physically ships the power drills and holds the inventory at the buyer's location. The boxes are literally sitting inside the hardware store's building, taking up their physical shelf space.
Right.
But the hardware store does not own them, and they do not pay the supplier for them until the exact moment a customer walks up to the register and buys one.
If you're a business owner listening to this, you're probably thinking, why on earth would I take on that risk as a supplier?
Exactly.
Holding inventory on a customer's floor, taking on all the carrying costs, and only getting paid when the customer finally decides to sell it.
What is the catch? Because on paper, that sounds like a terrible deal for the vendor. They take all the financial risk.
Well, this raises an important question. The catch is flawless integration and immense unbreakable trust. VMI and consignment are absolutely impossible without a massive foundation of perfect data sharing.
So they have to be totally synced up.
Perfectly. These alternative approaches require perfectly aligned digital business processes, crystal clear service level agreements, and just flawless e-commerce capabilities.
Because the vendor's digital brain is relying completely on the customer's physical accuracy. If the data is even slightly inaccurate, if there are any of those ghosts in the system we talked about earlier, the vendor is the one left holding the bag.
Exactly. The vendor is taking on huge financial risk. They must have absolute faith that the point-of-sale data they are receiving from the customer's registers is 100% accurate.
And if it's not?
If the customer's warehouse has a shrinkage problem, or if their employees aren't scanning the drills correctly when they move them to the floor, the vendor's replenishment algorithms will completely fail. They'll ship the wrong amounts, flood the store with excess product, and ultimately the vendor will lose a massive amount of money.
Wow. So when you pull all of this together, what are we really looking at? For you listening, the journey of a single item is staggering.
It really is.
We started by looking at the microscopic tracking of a single put-away transaction on a loading dock and the nightmare of tracking work in progress. We explored the kitchen drawer logic of organizing a physical warehouse layout and the necessity of those robotic ASRS systems.
Right.
We saw the devastating cascading costs of shrinkage and how a missing 10-cent bolt can derail an entire automotive supply chain. We looked at the lean elegance of cycle counting to seamlessly catch those physical errors. And finally, we ended up in the trust-based utopia of vendor-managed inventory, where companies are so deeply plugged into each other's data streams that formal purchase orders don't even exist anymore.
It's a complete evolution, from treating physical inventory as a static burden to treating it as a dynamic shared stream of information. But if we pull on that thread just a little bit further, it leads somewhere incredibly fascinating regarding the future of commerce.
Oh, yeah. Where's that?
Well, think about the core requirement of vendor-managed inventory. It relies entirely on perfect data sharing to work. The retailer hands over all their sales data,
Yeah.
and the vendor uses it to predict what the retailer needs.
Right.
But predictive AI and machine learning are getting exponentially better at analyzing those demand patterns.
Right. They can spot trends long before a human store manager ever could.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what happens when an outside vendor's predictive AI
Yeah.
understands a retail company's customer demand better than the retail company itself does?
Oh, wow.
If the algorithm knows exactly what your customers are going to buy before you do, will we see a future where retail businesses surrender all strategic control of their physical goods? Will major retail chains simply become empty physical showrooms, completely puppeteered by the algorithms of their massive manufacturing suppliers?
That is an incredible thought. Next time you click a button and that exact product magically appears on your porch without the global supply chain collapsing, just remember, the algorithm probably already knew you were going to buy it. It knew exactly what coordinate it lived at in a 1,000,000-square-foot warehouse, and it knew exactly how many times it was counted by a robot. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden world of inventory.